I remember when I was young and curious. Not curious in the way teachers like, but curious in the quiet, dangerous way. The kind of curiosity that asks questions you're not supposed to ask. I remember sitting somewhere, maybe a classroom, maybe at home, listening to adults explain how the world works. And something felt off. Not wrong, exactly, just incomplete. Like I was being shown answers, but not allowed to ask why those answers existed. At that age, I couldn't explain it. But now, looking back, I realized something, my friend. That feeling, that discomfort, that was the first time I sensed that reality might not be what it appears to be. Plato understood this feeling over 2,000 years ago, long before screens, long before news cycles, long before social media, algorithms, propaganda, and curated truth. He imagined a story so simple and yet so disturbing that once you hear it, you can never fully unhear it. Imagine this, my friend. You are born inside a cave. Not metaphorically, literally. Your hands are chained, your legs are chained, your neck is fixed forward. You cannot turn your head. Behind you there is a fire. Between the fire and you, people walk back and forth carrying objects, statues, tools, symbols. But you don't see those objects. You only see their shadows dancing on the cave wall in front of you. Those shadows are all you've ever known. So, what do you think happens? You name them, you study them, you build meaning around them. You argue about which shadow is better, which shadow is dangerous, which shadow deserves respect. Entire belief systems form based on shadows. And to you, those shadows are not illusions. They are reality. Now here's where Plato gets dangerous. What if, just what if, someone breaks free? What if one prisoner stands up, turns around, and sees the fire? At first, it hurts. Their eyes burn, their head aches. They resist, because truth is painful when you've lived in darkness. But eventually, they see the objects, not shadows, the real things. And then they walk out of the cave into sunlight, into a world so bright, so overwhelming, that it feels unreal. Imagine that moment. Everything you thought was real was just a projection. Everything you argued about was just an echo. Everything you feared was just a shadow. Now here's the part that most people miss. The freed prisoner doesn't feel happy at first. They feel confused, angry, disoriented. Because truth doesn't comfort you. Truth disrupts you. And then they do something brave. They go back into the cave to tell the others, to warn them, to say, hey, the world is bigger than this. And what happens? They're mocked. They're called crazy. They're told their eyes are broken. Some versions of the story suggest they're even threatened with death. Why? Because challenging someone's reality feels like attacking their identity. My friend, this is not an ancient story. This is now. This is education. This is politics. This is culture. This is social media. This is belief. This is comfort. Most people don't want truth. They want familiar shadows. And Plato knew this. That's why the allegory of the cave is not about intelligence. It's about courage. The courage to question, the courage to leave, the courage to return, and the courage to live with open eyes in a world that prefers darkness. So before we begin this journey together, let me ask you something gently. What if some of your strongest beliefs are just shadows? What if the pain you feel when someone challenges your ideas isn't anger, but fear of the light? And what if philosophy, real philosophy, is not about answers at all, but about learning how to turn your head? My friend, welcome to Plato's Allegory of the Cave. You're listening to Wise Alchemy. Let's begin. I used to believe that what I saw was all there was. The world felt obvious, solid, certain. Plato begins his story right there with that same quiet certainty. But he asks a dangerous question. What if what feels obvious is actually a prison? Imagine this, my friend. A dark cave, cold stone, no windows, no sunlight. Inside this cave, people have been living their entire lives. They are chained since birth, their legs fixed, their necks locked, their bodies unable to turn. They cannot look left, they cannot look right, they cannot look behind them. They can only stare at the wall in front of them. And they've never known anything else. Behind them, unseen, there is a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people walk back and forth carrying objects, statues, tools, shapes of animals, symbols of the world. The fire casts shadows of these objects onto the wall. And those shadows are all the prisoners have ever seen. The prisoners name the shadows, they talk about them, they argue about them, they build meaning around them. This shadow is strong, that shadow is dangerous, this one is important, that one is meaningless. They create stories, beliefs, opinions, judgments. They even reward the prisoners who are best at predicting which shadow comes next. To them, this is reality. And here's the part that should make you pause. The prisoners are not stupid. They are not ignorant by choice. They are not lazy. They are simply trapped inside what they were shown first. That's important. Because Plato is not talking about caves. He's talking about us. Think about it. From the moment you were born, you were shown a world. Language before understanding, beliefs before questioning, rules before choice, labels before awareness. This is success. This is failure. This is normal. This is strange. This is good. This is bad. And like the prisoners, you learned to live facing the wall. You didn't choose the wall. You inherited it. The shadows today look different, of course. Screens, headlines, social media, traditions, politics, trends, algorithms, expectations. But the structure is the same. You see representations, not the thing itself. You react to interpretations, not truth. And if everyone around you agrees, it feels real. Plato wants you to feel uncomfortable here, because the most dangerous prison is the one you don't know you're in. The prisoners don't dream of freedom. They don't imagine light. They don't question the wall. Why would they? This is all they've ever known. And that's why the cave works. Let me ask you something gently, my friend. If someone told the prisoners that the shadows were not real, that there was a fire behind them, that there was an entire world outside the cave, would they believe it? Or would they laugh? Would they feel curious or threatened? Plato already knows the answer. Normal life can be an illusion. Agreement does not equal truth. Familiarity does not mean reality. And the most unsettling thought of all, what if the cave feels comfortable precisely because it protects you from seeing something bigger? I hear you. Now that we understand the cave, now that we understand the prisoners, we need to talk about the shadows. Because the shadows are the real danger. Not chains, not darkness, but false certainty. Behind the prisoners, there is a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people walk back and forth. They carry objects, statues, tools, shapes, symbols. The fire casts their outlines onto the wall, and the prisoners see only this. They don't see the fire. They don't see the people. They don't see the objects. They see shadows of shadows. Plato is making a brutal point here. Most humans don't experience reality directly. They experience representations. Imagine this is all you've ever known. You were born here. You grew up here. You learned language here. When a shadow appears, someone names it. That is a horse. That is a tree. That is justice. That is success. That is truth. And because everyone agrees on the name, because everyone repeats it, because everyone rewards belief, the shadow becomes reality. Truth isn't discovered here. It's inherited. This is one of Plato's sharpest ideas. Language helps us think, but it also locks us inside illusions. Once something has a name, we stop questioning it. We don't ask, what is success? What is happiness? What is power? What is good? What is normal? We just repeat the shadows we were taught. My friend, the prisoners aren't stupid. They're trained. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The prisoners are comfortable. They know the patterns. They predict the shadows. They praise the ones who guess correctly. They build status inside the illusion. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. This is why illusions survive for centuries. People don't cling to lies because they're evil. They cling because uncertainty is terrifying. Plato isn't talking about caves. He's talking about media, culture, ideology, social norms, inherited beliefs, online identities, political narratives, success formulas. Most of what we call reality today is filtered, edited, framed, and projected. Shadows on a digital wall. And we argue about them, defend them, kill friendships over them, all without turning around. The most dangerous shadow isn't false information. It's the belief, I already know. The moment you think you see reality clearly, you stop looking. Plato is warning us. The cave survives because people mistake familiarity for truth. Now that we understand the shadows, now that we know how illusions are formed, there's a deeper question we must face. Why do the prisoners stay? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The cave is not just a prison. It is also comfortable. The prisoners have been in the cave since birth. They know the wall. They know the shadows. They know the patterns, the sounds, the rhythms. And because they know them, they trust them. The human mind does something dangerous here. It confuses familiarity with truth. What we see every day feels real. What we hear repeatedly feels correct. What everyone agrees on feels unquestionable. Not because it is true, but because it's comfortable. The cave feels safe precisely because it is known. Reality is uncertain. Truth is unstable. Questions have no clear endings. But illusions? Illusions are neat. Illusions are simple. Illusions give names, labels, rules. This is how the world works. This is who you are. This is what success means. This is what matters. Certainty is addictive. The prisoners prefer a false answer over an honest question. Because questions disturb the mind, answers let it rest. Now imagine one prisoner begins to feel uneasy. Not awake yet, just uncomfortable. Something feels off. This is the most painful stage of awakening. Not enlightenment, not freedom, confusion. And confusion feels worse than ignorance. When you doubt the shadows but don't yet see the light, you feel lost. Many people turn back here. They choose the cave again because confusion feels like danger. The mind whispers, "At least before I knew who I was." There is another force holding the prisoners in place. Other people. Everyone around them believes the same shadows, speaks the same language, claps for the same illusions. To disagree is to risk isolation. To question is to stand alone. My friend, humans fear isolation more than falsehood. Being wrong together feels safer than being right alone. This is why crowds defend illusions fiercely. This is why societies protect myths. This is why challenging beliefs feels like betrayal. Truth threatens belonging. Here is Plato's quiet warning. The chains are not just iron. They are emotional, comfort, routine, certainty, approval, belonging. These are powerful chains. And the most dangerous prison is the one that feels like home. The prisoners are not trapped because they are weak. They are trapped because the cave gives them peace without effort. At this stage, no one is forcing the prisoners. The fire burns. The shadows dance. Life continues. But now a question has been planted. And once planted, it never fully disappears. Is comfort worth the cost of truth? Some will never ask again. Others will feel restless forever. And a very few will eventually stand up. Up until now, everything we've talked about has been comfortable. Chains, shadows, familiar illusions. But now, something changes. Not because the cave changes, but because one prisoner does. And this is where Plato's story becomes dangerous. Imagine it. One prisoner, no explanation, no warning, is suddenly unchained. His legs are weak. His neck is stiff. His eyes have never looked anywhere except the wall. Freedom does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like pain. When he tries to stand, his body resists. When he tries to turn his head, his muscles scream. When he looks away from the wall, his eyes burn. Truth does not arrive gently. Plato is very precise here. The prisoner doesn't feel joy. He doesn't feel clarity. He feels confusion. The shadows he once understood so easily now seem meaningless. The shapes behind him are blurry. The fire hurts his eyes. Nothing makes sense anymore. This is the part nobody talks about. Awakening feels like losing your world. The old explanations are gone. The old certainty collapses. Even the lies were easier to live with. Here's something important, my friend. The prisoner doesn't want to turn around. Not because he's stupid, but because turning around means admitting, everything I believed was incomplete. That admission is painful. This is why people resist new ideas. This is why questioning feels threatening. This is why truth feels like an attack. It's not the truth that hurts. It's the ego breaking. Plato is brutally honest here. Truth does not arrive as pleasure. Truth arrives as disorientation. The prisoner thinks, I was happier before. At least I understood my world. Why was I dragged into this? Sound familiar? Every major awakening in history followed this pattern: confusion, anger, denial, discomfort. Only later, clarity. Awakening hurts first. Plato quietly implies something terrifying. Most prisoners, if given the choice, would ask to be chained again, because certainty feels safer than confusion, because familiarity feels warmer than truth, because illusion gives answers, while truth gives questions. My friend, this is not weakness. This is human nature. But something irreversible has happened. The prisoner has turned his head once. Even if he closes his eyes again, even if he goes back to the wall, he will never unsee the fire. A crack has formed in reality. This is the true beginning of philosophy. Not knowledge, not wisdom, but discomfort with illusion. This is not about intelligence, it's about courage. The courage to sit with confusion, the courage to admit uncertainty, the courage to endure pain without running back to comfort. Because truth does not free you immediately. First, it unsettles you. Imagine the prisoner who finally turned around. He endured pain. He questioned everything. He broke free from the chains. And now he sees the fire, the source of the shadows, the light that once controlled the cave. And for a moment, he feels victorious. Ah, he thinks, this must be the truth. But this is where Plato becomes dangerous, because the fire is not the sun. The freed prisoner now understands something the others don't. He knows how shadows are made. He sees the puppeteers. He understands the mechanism. Compared to the chained prisoners, he feels enlightened. And this is where many people stop. They confuse explanation with understanding. They confuse information with wisdom. They think, I know more than others, therefore I see reality. But Plato warns us gently. Partial truth can be more dangerous than ignorance. The fire feels warm, comforting, stable. It explains the world inside the cave perfectly. And because it works, because it makes sense, the mind wants to stop searching. This is the trap. False enlightenment always says, you've arrived. True wisdom whispers, you've only begun. Many people escape superstition only to worship logic. They escape myth only to worship ideology. They escape religion only to worship science as belief, not inquiry. The fire becomes their god. Plato is subtle here. The freed prisoner might return to the cave and say, I understand now. You are all wrong. But arrogance is not awakening. It is simply a new prison with better lighting. Knowing how shadows are made does not mean you understand reality itself. It only means you understand one layer. And the danger, when someone believes the fire is the ultimate truth, they stop listening, they stop doubting, they stop moving forward. They become guards of a new illusion. Let's slow this down. Facts answer what? Wisdom asks why. Facts describe. Wisdom transforms. A person can know everything about the fire, its heat, its source, its function, and still never see the sun. Because wisdom requires something facts don't. Humility. The willingness to admit, I don't yet see the whole. Plato is reminding us, the greatest danger is not ignorance, it is believing you already know. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The fire is still inside the cave. It still limits your vision. It still controls what you can see. It still defines reality on its own terms. And my friend, many modern systems are fires. Ideology, nationalism, rigid science without philosophy, dogmatic atheism, dogmatic religion, social media truths, political certainty. Each claims to explain everything. Each says, look no further. But Plato says, the real light is outside. To continue the journey, the prisoner must do something terrifying. He must leave the fire behind. Leave certainty. Leave explanations. Leave the comfort of being right. Most people never do, because uncertainty feels like blindness. But only those willing to be temporarily blind can learn to truly see. My friend, this is the moment most people never reach. Breaking free from the chains was painful. Turning toward the fire was confusing. But now, something far more difficult begins. The ascent. The prisoner is led upward, away from the fire, away from the wall, away from everything that once felt familiar. And Plato is very clear about this. Enlightenment is not a jump, it is a climb. Imagine it. The cave narrows. The ground becomes uneven. The air feels different. The light grows brighter, too bright. The prisoner stumbles, not because he is weak, but because his eyes were trained for darkness. This is important, my friend. Truth doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels disorienting. Old beliefs crumble, certainties dissolve, confidence disappears. The mind whispers, "Go back. At least the shadows made sense." Plato understood something psychology would confirm centuries later. The brain resists unfamiliar reality. When your worldview breaks, you don't feel smart, you feel stupid. You question yourself, you doubt your instincts, you feel lost. This is why many people stop halfway. They mistake confusion for failure. But confusion is not failure. Confusion is transition. It is the space between illusion and understanding. As the prisoner climbs, his eyes slowly adjust. At first, he can only see shapes, then reflections, then outlines, then movement. Reality doesn't arrive fully formed. It reveals itself layer by layer. This is Plato's quiet lesson. Wisdom is not sudden insight. Wisdom is patience with clarity. You don't wake up enlightened one morning. You train your perception. This stage often feels like losing your identity, because your identity was built inside the cave. Your opinions, your values, your confidence, your sense of who you are. As you climb, those dissolve. You're no longer certain, but you're no longer blind either. This is the space where thinkers are born. Not influencers, not parrots, not echo chambers. Thinkers. Here's the dangerous part. Many people stop at this stage. They learn some truth. They feel smarter than the prisoners, but they never reach the surface. They settle for partial clarity. Plato warns us here. Stopping halfway creates arrogance. You know enough to criticize, but not enough to understand. You mistake awareness for wisdom. This is where fake enlightenment lives. The ascent teaches humility. You realize how much you don't know. You stop shouting opinions. You start asking better questions. Reality becomes complex, but richer. Less comforting, but more honest. This is the cost of freedom. Let me say this clearly, my friend. The ascent is lonely. The ascent is slow. The ascent is painful. but it is the only path out. Plato isn't romanticizing enlightenment. He's warning you, because once you start seeing clearly, you can never unsee. After the pain of leaving the cave, after the blindness, the confusion, the slow adjustment to light, there comes a moment that changes everything. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly. The prisoner looks up, and for the first time, he sees the sun. Plato is very careful here. The sun is not just a bright thing in the sky. It is not simply another level of knowledge. The sun represents the source of truth, meaning, reality itself. Just as the sun makes sight possible, the form of the good makes understanding possible. Without the sun, eyes are useless. Without truth, intelligence is blind. The prisoner realizes something shocking. Everything he saw before, the shadows, the fire, the reflections, they were not lies. They were partial truths. And partial truth is the most dangerous illusion of all. At first, the prisoner cannot look directly at the sun. It burns. It overwhelms. It feels unbearable. Plato is telling us something uncomfortable. Ultimate truth is not comforting. It strips away certainty, ego, identity, old beliefs. Truth doesn't flatter you. It humbles you. That's why many people stop at the fire. They learn facts. They collect explanations. They feel smart. But they never ask, what is the source of all this? Facts without wisdom are just brighter shadows. Inside the cave, people had opinions. Outside the cave, the freed prisoner gains knowledge. Plato draws a sharp line. Opinion changes. Truth remains. Appearances shift. Reality endures. When the prisoner understands the sun, he understands cause, not just effect. He sees why things are the way they are. This is the moment philosophy is born. Not memorizing ideas, not arguing online, but asking, what makes anything true at all? Here is the quiet tragedy Plato slips in. When the prisoner understands the sun, he also understands something else. Most people will never see it. Not because they are stupid, but because they are comfortable. Truth separates, not by arrogance, by depth. This is why thinkers, philosophers, scientists, and mystics often feel isolated. Not superior, just alone. Because once you see the source, small arguments feel meaningless. The prisoner now sees the world differently. He understands what is real, what is imitation, what matters, what distracts. Nothing looks the same anymore. Plato's message is subtle but radical. Truth doesn't add information. It reorganizes your entire vision. This is why philosophy is dangerous. Once you truly understand, you cannot unsee. Plato is not done yet. Seeing the sun is not the end. It's the beginning of responsibility. Because knowledge is not for ego. It's for service. The one who sees truth now faces a difficult choice. Stay in the light or return to the cave. And that is where the real danger begins. The sun is not comfort. It is clarity. It does not promise happiness. It promises understanding. And understanding changes everything. You would think that seeing the sun would be the end of the story. Freedom, clarity, truth. light. But Plato does something unexpected here. He asks a harder question. What happens after you see the truth? Shh. This chapter is not about enlightenment. It's about what enlightenment demands from you. After the prisoner sees the sun, after understanding reality, meaning, and truth, something surprising happens. He wants to go back. Not because the cave is better, not because ignorance is comfortable anymore, but because others are still suffering inside it. This is the first burden of wisdom. Once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend you don't. You can't unsee the chains. You can't ignore the shadows. You can't forget the pain of ignorance. Knowledge creates responsibility. Now, imagine this enlightened prisoner returning to the cave. His eyes, once adjusted to sunlight, can barely see in the darkness. He stumbles. He speaks strangely. He questions what everyone else accepts. And the prisoners laugh. They say, "See, the journey ruined him. He's confused. He's dangerous. He thinks he's better than us." Plato is brutally honest here. Truth does not make you popular. It makes you suspicious. Because people who live by shadows feel threatened by those who speak of light. Here's the psychological truth, my friend. When you challenge someone's illusion, you're not just challenging an idea, you're challenging their identity, their beliefs, their certainty, their sense of safety. That's why truth feels violent to those who aren't ready. It destabilizes, it confuses, it removes the comfort of knowing. Plato isn't saying people are stupid. He's saying illusion feels safer than uncertainty. This is where Plato places the philosopher, not on a throne, not above others, but between two worlds. The philosopher sees truth, but lives among illusion. He understands reality, but speaks to those who don't want to hear it. That's a lonely position. Too awake for the cave, too human to abandon it. Wisdom isolates you, not because you're superior, but because you see too much. Plato makes a radical claim here. Truth is not private property. If you see clearly, you don't get to hide. If you understand reality, you don't get to keep it to yourself. Why? Because knowledge without compassion becomes arrogance, and enlightenment without responsibility becomes ego. Real wisdom is heavy. It asks, how do I help without forcing? How do I speak without humiliating? How do I guide without controlling? Plato doesn't sugarcoat this. The enlightened prisoner risks everything by returning: ridicule, rejection, hostility, even death. And remember, Plato is writing this knowing what happened to Socrates. This is not abstract philosophy. It's a warning. Society often kills those who question its shadows. So what is Plato really saying? He's not telling you to force truth on others. He's not telling you to argue endlessly. He's not telling you to wake everyone up. He's saying, if you see clearly, be patient, be humble, be compassionate, be careful. Truth needs timing. Wisdom needs empathy. And sometimes, the most responsible thing is not to shout the truth, but to live it quietly. This is where Plato's story stops being philosophical and starts becoming painfully human. Because enlightenment does not end at the sun. It ends when the enlightened one turns back. After seeing the sun, after understanding reality beyond shadows, after tasting truth itself, the freed prisoner makes a choice. He goes back. Not because he misses the cave, not because he doubts the truth, but because he remembers something important. The others are still chained. This is the moment where wisdom becomes responsibility. Knowledge, Plato tells us, is not meant to be hoarded. Truth is not a private treasure. If it is real, it must be shared. So the enlightened one descends. But something strange happens. The moment he re-enters the cave, his eyes betray him. He stumbles. He hesitates. He struggles to see the shadows clearly again. The darkness he once mastered now feels confusing. And the prisoners notice. They laugh. "Look at him," they say. "He went out and came back blind. His journey ruined him. Truth made him stupid." This is the cruel irony Plato exposes. Those who leave illusion are mocked by those who never did. To the prisoners, the enlightened one sounds ridiculous. He speaks of a sun they've never seen, a world they've never touched, a reality that contradicts everything they know. And worse, he questions their certainty. He threatens their comfort. And humans will forgive ignorance faster than uncertainty, because certainty feels safe, illusion feels familiar, doubt feels dangerous. So the truth-teller becomes the enemy. Plato understood something deep about the human mind. People don't reject truth because it's false. They reject it because it's destabilizing. Truth asks you to admit, I might be wrong. My life might be built on shadows. My beliefs might not be mine. And that is terrifying. So instead of breaking the chains, people defend them. They attack the messenger. They mock the awakened. They protect the illusion. My friend, this is not abstract. This is Socrates. This is Galileo. This is Jesus. This is every thinker who returned to the cave and paid the price. Plato knew this firsthand. Socrates didn't die because he lied. He died because he asked people to look again. And people don't like turning their heads. The cave does not want to be destroyed. It survives through agreement, through repetition, through silence. Anyone who breaks that silence becomes a threat. So the prisoners say, don't listen to him. He's confused. He's dangerous. He's arrogant. Truth is often mistaken for arrogance by those who refuse to question themselves. And Plato ends this part with a warning. If the enlightened one tried to free them by force, if he tried to drag them out, they would kill him. Not because they are evil, but because fear, when cornered, becomes violent. This is the tragedy of wisdom. Seeing more does not guarantee being understood. This asks you something uncomfortable. If you saw the truth, would you go back? And if you did, would you be ready to be misunderstood? Because truth does not come with applause. It comes with isolation. But Plato doesn't say this to scare you. He says it to prepare you. The cave is not just society. It's not just media. It's not just culture. The cave is inside us. Every time we reject a thought because it's uncomfortable, every time we mock a question instead of answering it, every time we choose certainty over curiosity, we choose the cave. And every time we question gently, listen carefully, and doubt honestly, we take one step toward the light. Not everyone will follow, but that doesn't mean the sun isn't real. There is a moment in Plato's Allegory that most people rush past, but it might be the most disturbing part of the entire story. It's not the cave, it's not the chains, it's not even the darkness. It's what happens after truth returns. The freed prisoner does something strange. After seeing the sun, after understanding reality, after realizing the shadows were lies, he goes back. Not to dominate, not to mock, but to help. This is where philosophy becomes dangerous, because the moment truth enters a system built on illusion, it doesn't look like wisdom. It looks like a threat. Back in the cave, the freed prisoner can barely see. His eyes, now adjusted to sunlight, struggle in the darkness. He stumbles, he hesitates, he looks confused. And the prisoners laugh. See, they say, leaving the cave made him stupid. thinking ruined him. Better to stay where we are. Truth doesn't return wearing a crown, it returns wearing weakness. And society judges intelligence by confidence, not by accuracy. People don't hate lies, they hate losing certainty. Illusions give structure, they give identity, they give comfort. Truth removes all three. So when someone questions the shadows, they aren't just questioning beliefs, they're threatening jobs, power, hierarchy, identity, tradition, control. Truth doesn't feel like freedom at first, it feels like collapse. Plato doesn't stop at ridicule, he goes further. He says that if the freed prisoner tried to unchain others, if he tried to force them to turn around, they would kill him. Not because he's evil, but because he's destabilizing. This is not metaphorical, this is historical. Plato is warning us. This story is not about imagination, it's about Socrates, a man who questioned shadows, a man who asked people to think, a man who made power uncomfortable. And what did Athens do? They accused him of corrupting the youth, of disrespecting tradition, of destabilizing society. And then they killed him. The cave doesn't kill liars, it kills liberators. Power survives on predictability. Truth creates uncertainty. Once people realize the shadows are shadows, authority weakens, obedience fades, fear dissolves, hierarchy trembles. So power responds the only way it knows how. Silence the question, destroy the questioner, restore the illusion. This is why thinkers are exiled, imprisoned, mocked, or erased. Not because they're wrong, but because they're early. My friend, look around history. Socrates, Jesus, Galileo, Giordano Bruno, whistleblowers, reformers, revolutionaries. Different eras, same reaction. Truth enters the cave panics, the cave strikes back, because illusion feels safer than freedom. Plato isn't telling you this to scare you. He's telling you so you understand the cost. Truth is not just enlightening, it is isolating. Thinking deeply may not make you popular, questioning may not make you safe, seeing clearly may not make you accepted, but it will make you awake. Plato didn't know about smartphones. He didn't know about television. He didn't know about social media, algorithms, or advertising. And yet, he described them perfectly. Because the cave was never a place, it was a pattern. Today, the cave doesn't look like chains and stone walls. It looks like endless scrolling. Headlines designed to provoke, not inform. Opinions repeated until they sound like truth. Numbers replacing meaning. Speed replacing reflection. The fire still burns, but now it's made of screens. Shadows are no longer cast on walls. They are cast on feeds. And the prisoners? They call it being informed. Here is the dangerous part, my friend. In Plato's cave, someone manually held the puppets. Today, algorithms do it automatically. They don't care about truth. They care about attention. They learn what makes you angry, what confirms your beliefs, what keeps you watching, what stops you from questioning, and then they show you more of it. Not because it's real, but because it's comfortable. This is the modern cave, a reality customized to keep you chained. Plato made a sharp distinction. Education turns the soul toward truth. Indoctrination locks the soul into certainty. Today, many systems don't teach how to think, they teach what to think. Facts are memorized, questions are discouraged. Complexity is simplified into slogans. A person who has never questioned will fight to protect their shadows, because doubt feels like danger. The cave survives because it feels safe. Comfort narratives tell you, you're already right. You're on the good side. The problem is them. Don't look too deeply. Truth, on the other hand, says, you might be wrong. You don't know everything. Reality is complex. Change will hurt. Most people don't reject truth because it's false. They reject it because it's uncomfortable. The cave doesn't need guards anymore. Comfort does the job. Here's the unsettling realization. There isn't just one cave anymore. There are many. Political caves, ideological caves, cultural caves, spiritual caves, identity caves. Each with its own shadows, each with its own fire, each convinced it alone sees reality. People don't argue about truth anymore. They argue between different shadow systems, and everyone thinks they're awake. Plato's question returns, sharper than ever. If the cave is everywhere, how do you know you've left it? The answer is not certainty, it's humility. Not shouting, but listening. Not defending, but examining. Not belonging blindly, but thinking slowly. The moment you stop asking questions is the moment the chains tighten again. Plato didn't warn us about technology. He warned us about human nature. Our love of comfort, our fear of uncertainty, our desire to belong. The cave survives not because of power, but because we choose familiarity over truth. So, before you ask, who is trapped? Ask quietly, which cave am I still inside? My friend, after everything we've seen, the chains, the shadows, the fire, the climb, the sun, and the return, there is only one question left. Not for the prisoners, not for philosophers, not for history, but for you. Are you still in the cave? Plato never meant this story to stay in ancient Greece. He meant it to turn inward. Because the hardest thing a human being can do is not to break chains, but to recognize them. Chains don't always feel like chains. Sometimes they feel like comfort, routine, certainty, popularity, belonging, success, tradition. This is just how things are. Chains often feel normal. That's why they work. Ask yourself, honestly, quietly, what ideas have you never questioned because questioning them would cost you comfort? What beliefs do you defend not because they are true, but because they are familiar? What opinions feel like yours but were handed to you by culture, family, algorithms, fear? What shadows do you protect because letting them go would leave you uncertain? Plato is whispering here. The chains you cannot see are the ones that bind you the tightest. It's tempting to say, oh, they are in the cave. People are blind. Society is manipulated. Media lies. But Plato doesn't let you escape that easily. The cave is not just political, not just cultural, not just digital. The cave is psychological. It lives in the stories you tell yourself, the identity you refuse to examine, the version of reality that flatters you, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being alone. Sometimes the strongest cave is inside your own certainty. Here is the most misunderstood part of Plato's message. You don't escape the cave once. You escape it again, and again, and again. Every time you question yourself, you loosen a chain. Every time you doubt your certainty, you step closer to light. Every time you listen instead of react, you turn your head. Every time you choose truth over comfort, you climb. Philosophy is not graduation, it's a practice. Even the enlightened prisoner can fall back into shadow. Even the one who saw the sun can become arrogant. Even wisdom can become another cave if it hardens into ego. That's why Plato doesn't end with victory. He ends with responsibility, with humility, with vigilance. The moment you say, "I am free now," is often the moment a new cave forms around you. So, my friend, before this story ends, Plato leaves you with silence. No instructions, no commandments, no answers. Just a mirror and one quiet question. What are you mistaking for reality? The cave is always there. The shadows never stop. The fire keeps burning. But so does the path upward. And the climb is always yours. And that's it for today, my friend. You were listening to Wise Alchemy. The story ends here for now, but you and I will meet again. Thank you.